Okay everybody, I'm going to give you a quick lesson on composting 101. I'm out here with my beautiful compost pile and I will walk you guys through the basic procedures of how to start composting. There's a whole bunch of different ways and specialty equipment that you can buy for composting, but honestly all you really need is a pile. You can just have a compost pile and that's perfectly acceptable. That said, if you want to make it a little bit more secure from like res dogs or bears or other animals, you can definitely opt to make yourself some round tubes. You can make them yourself by using fencing and just wrapping the fencing in a tube that's about 3 feet in diameter and then zip tying it or using fencing ties to close it off. If you're going to do that, I'd recommend making at least 2 of them so that when you rotate the compost, you can actually rotate it into one tube from the other tube. That's going to help ensure that there's aeration all the way around the tube, but it keeps your pile contained and it's harder for animals to get into it. If you don't like the idea of making your own tube using fencing, there are definitely composting tubes that you can buy. This is just a simple composting tube that you can find on Amazon, and this has some closures, so you could basically decide how wide you want to make your tube, and then this will just sit on the ground and you can start filling it up with your composting materials. Again, if you get these, get at least 2 of them so that you can rotate between the 2. So that gives you a good idea of one of the things that's available on the market. You also have the option of buying a tumbler like this. So this tumbler is just a big, nearly round tumbler that is up on a stand, and so you can put your compost in, seal it, and then you can aerate it without having to do all the pitchfork work that's required of the tubes or of a compost pile. So that can be an option, but this is going to be a little bit more expensive, but it is going to keep it much more secure from the animals and make it much more easier to rotate. Now that you have an idea of the type of equipment that's available, let's get started on talking about what you put into your compost pile. Now, your compost pile is essentially a mixture of things that we can classify as greens or browns. So greens are going to be your things that are freshly dead and have a little bit more moisture. So the things that you have in your kitchen, like the onion skins and your peels from your cucumbers or your potatoes or your other things like that. Your greens are going to have a much higher percentage of nitrogen when compared to your browns. This is going to ensure that we have a good carbon-nitrogen balance when we look at the final compost mix. Your browns are going to be things like dead leaves, like mulch from cutting your grass, like wood chips, like straw, things like that, that have been dead a little bit longer and are generally drier in composition, and those are your higher carbon materials. So that's going to help ensure that we have that perfect blend in our compost pile. So generally, most folks will say opt for a 50-50 ratio of greens to browns. Keep it really simple and watch your compost pile. If it starts to smell, add more browns. If it's looking really dry, add more greens, give it a little bit of water. You want to make sure that all the microbes within that pile or within your tumbler, whatever your compost situation is, are able to really break down those things without molding. You're not trying to create a moldy environment or a stinky environment. A good compost pile should really smell like sweet soil, and it should be warm. You want to ensure that those microbes are able to really decompose things as fast as they're able to. And that's going to ensure that all of those scraps that you put in there are going to turn into really, really healthy compost that will feed your plants in the next season. So this compost pile here, you can see some of the scraps that are there. There's some cardboard, which you can totally add unbleached, undyed cardboard to your pile. And there are some eggshells. Eggshells take a little bit longer to break down than some other things, but we do a lot of composting, and so I will either mix my eggshells into the compost pile, or I will crumple those eggshells up and put them right into the garden, especially around plants that need calcium, like tomatoes. So lots of good things to do with eggshells. They also help prevent slugs from getting on your plants. So if you're a beginner and you're a little bit worried about something not breaking down quickly, feel free to put your eggshells somewhere else in your garden right now. I also have this little bucket. This is what I keep on my counter in the kitchen. And this is where I put food scraps when I'm cutting up vegetables and things like that. So this is a cute little bin. It keeps things nice and not stinky in the kitchen because it has a carbon filter. But you could just have a bowl that you empty out in your compost pile after you're done cutting kitchen scraps. So this is just filled with some things from the kitchen and has some garlic skins, some carrot tops, things like that. And I'm just going to add this to the compost pile. A lot of eggshells. And you can just throw that right on top of your compost pile. But when you're looking at how to take care of your compost pile, you really want to make sure that at least once a week you're giving that compost pile a good aeration. There are tools that you can use to aerate the compost pile, but really it works well just to grab a pitchfork and give it a good turn. If you have a pile, I would rotate it into another pile, so the things that are on the top are going to another one, and you're able to kind of keep that rotation up. And then if it looks dry, as I mentioned before, either add more green materials, really wet stuff, or give it a watering. Sprinkle it with your hose, let that moisture sink in so that it's creating a really good environment for your worms and your microbes that are doing a lot of that work and breaking down all of those goods into good nutrients for your plants. That's really all there is to it. You can get more complicated. We can talk about carbon to nitrogen ratios. Aim for a 50-50 ratio of greens to browns. I'll put a list on the screen for you guys so you have an idea of what classifies as greens and browns. And then ultimately, I would love if folks had like 3 different tubes or piles in rotation so that you have something that's actively breaking down, that is in its just rotation stage. You're not adding new things to it, and you're letting it break down, which is really what this pile is about to be. And I'm going to start adding to the tumbler instead, and going to start giving that a good rotation and adding to that instead, which is going to let this pile rest, break down. I'm going to keep aerating it and rotating it, but it's going to make sure that everything that's in there, all of that cardboard and other things that have been added, break down in the next 6 months and are ready to be added to the garden in the spring. If you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my contact information down in the description so you guys are able to ask questions. If you have more details or want more of the sciencey side about composting, there's a lot of other resources that are out there. Composting really shouldn't be something that is intimidating. It's really easy to do. A good compost pile, as I mentioned before, shouldn't stink. It really shouldn't be attracting a lot of animals. And you should be able to find a way to reduce food waste in your home and also to be able to provide a perfectly free nutrient to your plants without having to rely on chemical fertilizers or even things that you have to buy at the store. Thank you guys so much for watching.